Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Lovebabz Love Talk. If it's around 9 o'clock, you know I'm on. I'm Babz Rawls Ivy, and today I'm talking, and I've got Enroue Halfkenny back.
Good morning.
We are doing this mystical work.
Yes.
O'clock, you know I'm on. I can't. I'm Babz Rawls Ivy.
I can't.
I'm talking.
Okay, Harry.
I got Enroue Halfkenny.
I got
back.
somebody else.
I got me on
we are
twice.
doing this
mystical work.
Harry.
Yes.
O'clock, you know
Okay.
I'm on.
I can't.
I'm Babz Rawls Ivy.
I don't know
I
what to
can't
do.
talking.
Twice as
Okay,
nice.
Harry.
I got Enroue Halfkenny.
I got.
back.
I
Somebody
hear
else.
myself all over the place.
So anyway, there's no place I can go now when people are not coming up to me asking me questions about this. They love.
Good.
People are loving this.
Oh, good.
I was like, y'all need to call Enroue. I don't really have any answers for you. Like, I know you want me to be the conduit. I can't. You got to talk directly to the source. I can't be your middleman. So how are you?
I'm good.
How have you been since the
I'm
last time
good.
we talked?
Good. Busy.
Yeah.
So busy is good, but also trying not to get lost in that, right? Or just try also kind of create space,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's too much of a habit of you just got to keep moving, got to be relentless, got to push.
You know, it's funny. I just read something that said you don't always have to be on your grind. That you can reset, relax, and restore. Like you don't
Right,
have to be
right,
grinding
right,
24/7.
right.
Like
right.
everybody don't got to be P Diddy.
No, well, like there's such a culture of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like can't rest, can't stop, gotta keep moving, gotta keep serving, gotta keep doing good, gotta keep go. And I mean, I was certainly raised that way. And I've had to learn, and I'm learning that not just kind of under the notion of self-care, but like I get to be here and I get to like have a life and explore what that is while I'm using the things that I can use and be the way I want to be. But that being part is often kind of left out of the equation. There's so much to do that there's not as much practice on how to be.
You know, I had a young woman from Yale on a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about the expectation, like when you go to Yale, when you go anywhere, the expectation to always be doing, always to be striving for greatness every minute of every day.
Yeah.
And she said, you know, I realized I was killing myself, that I was draining myself.
Right.
And she was a young woman that came to that conclusion. And I thought, it is taking me 50 years to figure that out. You know, you just give until you can't give anymore.
Right. Actually, it's a great movement. So the last time I was here, there was the Black Solidarity Conference coming up.
Yes. How was that for you?
That was great. But before I mentioned anything about that, this notion of being, and I can add something else. I actually want to sing a song to kind of offer this traditional Yoruba chant, which is a chant to our ancestors. So
okay, I'm there.
I'll tell you what it means first.
Okay.
So it starts by saying, and they're kind of 3 verses, and the difference of them is we are honoring our fathers, we're honoring our male lineage, we're honoring female lineages, our mothers, and then we're honoring all of our ancestors. And we're thanking them for the gifts that they bring to us. We thank them for the ashe that they have and that they bring to us. And ashe is a term that means many things. It's so be it. We say it at the end of prayers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a spiritual power unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
So things, beings have ashe, have an essence, a spiritual essence. And then also it's like authority. So someone has the authority to do something. They have that ashe to do that thing. And so and I'm sure there's lots of other ways that it's kind of interpreted, translated into English. And so we're thanking our ancestors for the ashe that they give to us, right? This kind of transmission of these blessings, of this authority, of these gifts. And then the second part is we thank you for those and we're using them today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right, this song, which is like I'm honoring you, I'm thanking you and honoring you that these gifts exist and I'm using them. And I think that even in that, even as we kind of talk around this kind of like having to do, but it's also learning to be what we're receiving as a part of who we are. So, and this is a song we often, I often kind of open things with, even presentations or speaking that I do. But it's also something that I'll do while I'm literally just in front of my ancestor altar, about to offer them things or listen to them or speak to them. So here it goes. Iba ba ba tofu washe o. Iba ba ba tofu washe. Iba ba ba tofu washe o. Iba ba ba tofu washe. Ashe tefu wan lando yo. Iba ba ba tofu washe. Iba ye ye tofu washe o. Iba ye ye tofu washe. Iba ye ye tofu washe o. Iba ye ye tofu washe. Ashe tefu wan lando yo. Iba ye ye tofu washe. Iba egun tofu washe o. Iba egun tofu washe. Iba egun tofu washe o. Iba egun tofu washe. Ashe tefu wan lando yo. Iba egun tofu washe. Iba egun tofu washe. Iba egun tofu washe.
Wow. That just cleansed the whole air. Somebody
Yeah.
heard that this morning and it has been lifted.
Good.
I
hope
know
so.
it. I
hope
know
so.
it. I've been lifted.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we do it,
Mm-hmm.
to be filled, right? To receive that love and support
Mm-hmm.
that we need, just to be, right, just to walk the earth,
Mm-hmm.
because we need that. We can't do this alone.
Yes. Talk a little bit, Enroue, a little bit about being and the busyness and the busyness of busy. I think we are too busy. I don't think people
Yeah.
take enough time to surrender to a moment or time and space. Like we try to fill every moment with everything. When I was in my spiritual direction training, we learned to sit in the silence with people so that every time you encounter somebody and you're having a conversation with them, every moment of the time you're with them does not have to be filled with conversation. That you can sit and be in stillness with someone and still be communicating.
That listening is a part of communicating. In the silence, something's happening as well.
Yes.
Yeah, our culture doesn't do that well. That's not the message of this culture. It's not in the listening. It's not in the being. It's in the doing. And even separate from actually in all our doings, if we don't be, we're actually not really efficient in what we're doing either. So for me, this practice has helped me to listen deeper and deeper. There's so much noise.
Oh, the world is loud.
Right. And the world and all the noise is telling you things and is actually wanting you to consume things. Do it this way, do it that way, buy this, buy that, right? And if you just walk around and look at what is communicating to you, right, in the city, the biggest and the loudest things are about consuming something. Come here, buy this thing, eat here, right? Call this number. If this is happening, do this. And there's very little space. There's very little opportunity to listen to what's going on inside, which is much more subtle, and what's happening kind of behind the billboards, right? So what's happening in the season? We started kind of joking a little bit about the season and the winter and New England and warm and then cold and snow and then it's gone. And imagine, as opposed to our relationship to nature being about the convenience or inconvenience of it, we also take that in as something to listen to, not to get something, just because we're actually in relationship with it all the time. And what's fundamental to these traditions is that we're in relationship with these things all the time. And it's actually about cultivating a healthy relationship to ourselves, to our family, to our community, to our ancestors, to the divine, to these seen and unseen forces. Because just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And I can't see what's literally behind me right now unless I look at the monitor and the camera.
Right.
but it's still there,
Yes.
right?
That's a good point.
We can get really bogged down on the proof of things, in terms of what we can measure,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't actually live that way. Right? We live in our day to day. We're living like, oh, here's a person who walks in. I'm not doing like a double blind study to see if I should get up and say hi to them or meet their eyes or look back down at my phone. We're responding. We're acting, and sometimes for ways that are skillful, and sometimes in ways that are reactive. But even in that, there's very little listening to like, how am I doing? How am I? Where am I right now? Even that phrase, how am I doing? Right? Even as I said it, it's built in the doing part, right? Not, oh, how am I being today? That's not the question. It's like, how am I doing today? So in all of these ways, where it's a conditioning just through repetition and habit to interact with each other, and even to be with ourselves in a particular way, in a transactional way. And so to be curious and to pause, to allow silence, which I know on the radio is not what you want.
No.
Right? And so even the way that we are with this medium, right, there's a relentlessness to it. I don't want to miss something. And if there's more spaciousness, then we can be with it better without the like, somehow the thing that I need is going to whisk by and I need to grasp it. And there's that grasping quality because there's not as much practice being and sitting and listening. And it doesn't have to be passive. I mean, we can be moving through the world. We can even be kind of doing a thing, but can we listen while we're doing it? Can we be present while we're engaged in our life? Even we get aside from a doing or not, because like, well, you're really always doing something. You're always breathing. Like, sure, I can drink some water, and in that drinking, am I present with it, or am I my mind somewhere else? I'm off to something else.
Like I'm drinking it, but I'm already around the corner down the block.
Right.
And that's, you get that with people, when you've been on a diet and they tell you to eat mindfully. That's what they're telling you. Right. To like pay attention to what you're eating. Right. Like don't try to eat on the run. Don't try to eat and then you're doing 50 million lists and you're not paying attention, and then you get up from the table and you're like, what did I just eat? And then you don't feel full. Right? That feeling of not feeling full.
Because it also, sometimes when we do that, we're not eating because we're hungry. We're eating to fill something else. And it's hard to sit with that. It's hard to sit with one of the things that's difficult for many people is that silence. Because what fills the silence? Themselves and their critics, right? That's in their head, the self-judgment that's there.
Or what I say, the choir of they or them.
Yep. This is what you should be doing, and you're not enough. Right. And those are like old messages that we've internalized. And so, but what happens is that we forget how to be with ourselves. And so if we can't be with ourselves, and we're looking for all these other things to fill us up, right? That food, electronics, sex, drugs, alcohol, almost anything can be used in a way, in that kind of addictive quality to fill something up, because it's hard to be with ourselves. It's hard to listen to what's happening.
Yeah.
Because it can be uncomfortable.
A lot uncomfortable. And people are not ready to unpack. Maybe the first couple of layers you will unpack, but as you get deeper, it gets a little scarier for people.
Yeah.
In my experience with working with people in spiritual direction, that they want a relationship with God, but then when they have to do the work to be in a relationship with God, it becomes challenging.
Right, because it's in the relationship, and it's often in the relationships that we've been hurt. And so one thing that's been really powerful around this kind of ancestor work is that it's 100% relevant to also those hurts that have happened in our relationships. Very, not always, but often, right? Those things have happened within families, and not even like necessarily hugely traumatic things, but even just ways that we feel not seen, and so we kind of adopt other ways of being. And so this practice for me has helped me to not just kind of have space to listen, and am I going to touch upon something and unpack it or not, but move closer into those very relationships that have sometimes been very supportive, but also sometimes helped me to, not helped me, but led me to have some really distorted thinkings about my value, about my connections.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this practice, there's the deep listening, and then there are ways to then work on that and to be with that while you're also getting support. And I think that, and I imagine you found this too, when talking to people about prayer or spiritual practice or spiritual work, there can be like, well, I don't know what to say, or like, what if I like am nervous or have these doubts? And well, right, you can actually pray for help.
Yeah.
On that too. I don't know what to say. Yep, you can just say like, I'm just praying that I know what to say.
Yeah.
I'm just praying that I know how to just like what I'm doing, or that I can be with myself, to really touch upon the deep yearnings that we have, and to do it with some support.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, you're just launching someone into like their fearful places, and that's not helpful.
Yes.
Right.
Not at all.
That's not at all helpful.
It's like throwing somebody in the deep end without a life raft, and they don't know how to swim, and
Right.
and you're like, well, you know, if you just
move around a lot. Right. And that's not helpful.
No.
And that's not the point. I mean, in my life, I've done and had to learn a lot of things kind of trial by fire, and like, yeah, I don't need to do that anymore. There might be some other ways of being,
Mm-hmm.
right, that are following and trusting in a very different way. And all of that, so much of that for me is because of the work and the engagement that I've done. I didn't, when I was younger, I was not particularly self-aware. I was very reactive. I was hiding, right? Someone could say like, oh, like, so you're wearing like some headphones, you're talking to a mic. I'd be like, well, not really. That's not me. Right? It's one of those like denying something because I didn't want to give anything of myself to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to really learn that if I live that way, and like we're saying in the beginning, if we live just listening to all the noise and all that is the definition of who we are, what's here? It's that's pretty empty life.
Yeah.
And it's not connected to who we are,
Mm-hmm.
even as we can be scared of really being connected to who we are. And that's the kind of place, that's a very challenging place to be in. And so I had to really work out of that and move through that, and do a lot of work where I can really feel restored in these kind of receptive places, this deep listening, this connection to mystery and the divine and wonder. And even while I'm very aware of what like very concrete kind of systems of oppression and navigating things are,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just like, we just have to, everybody is one, and the rainbows, and it's beautiful. And it's like, okay, like there's wonder and magic and mystery, and there is not. Right. And it's the navigating that, it's the kind of back and forth of that.
Mm-hmm.
Which for me, even now, in my development, as I'm more sensitive to things, my practice needs to be kind of more diligent in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Not relentless, not the kind of pushing, but like, oh, I really need this.
Mm-hmm.
And that has value just because I need it. Not because I need it so that I can then transmit it and give it to someone else or support someone else, but like, oh, right, my life, my purpose.
And that's I think that's where I'm at now.
Yeah.
More, I find myself not wanting to do group kinds of things around community things. I've done that. You know what I want to do now? I want to sort of work on my own internal self,
Right.
and find the peace within, so that I'm not in community reacting all the time. Because every day there's some new fight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's always a fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've decided to jump out of these fights, pick up 2 or 3 things that I'm passionate about, pay attention to those things, and everything else, I leave it to other people to sort of pick up, so that I'm doing more of my own protecting of my spirit and listening to myself and what I want to do. So I no longer want to do things because I think it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to show up to things because, well, they need Black people to show up to these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I used to hold that responsibility. And I've decided I don't want to hold that responsibility anymore. I think there's a responsibility to Blackness, but I also think the responsibility to Blackness is, for me at this point, has changed to reflect more self-awareness. more internal growth, more rest,
Mm-hmm. Right.
more rest.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I don't want to, and fun, and fun.
Yeah.
I think we, and I'm not talking about superficial fun. I'm talking about honest to God fun, where you feel lifted, you feel God, you feel, you're with people that are all about what you're about. I don't want to just half-ass do things and show up for things. I don't. And so I've made a point of that since I turned 50, and I've been 50 for 5 years now. I've been charting this path. Like I don't want to do direct services. I want to be a philanthropist. I want to be able to give my money. I want to be able to give money to soup kitchens. I don't necessarily want to go serve food in soup kitchens because I've done that for many, many years. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a shifting. And I don't want to be, and I don't want to listen to people say, "Oh, you have to do, we should, everybody should." No.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a great quote by Howard Thurman, black activist and theologian, and see if I can get it right. It's don't do what you think the world needs. Do what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who've come alive.
Yes. I know that quote.
Yeah, and that has been really pivotal in the shifting of the shoulds.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, I should do this, or I can. Like, just because I can, I should.
Yeah.
And like, what are the things that really make me come alive? And to me, that's a much bigger connection to life and to purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all connected and we're all unique. And so there isn't one way to do this. And in this process, this has really been a practice that's helped me to do that in that exploration of blackness that you talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And in that very exploration of blackness is the exploration of what it means to be a person, what it means to be a human being. And those things are constantly interwoven and connected and
I don't think we get to do that deliberately.
No,
I
because
think
we're
our
dehumanized all the time.
Our blackness is so much a weight that we tote everywhere. And I see people who won't take the time to sort of, I'm not saying divest from blackness, but take the time for yourself.
Well, what's happened is blackness has meant a reactivity to white supremacy. There are aspects of that that's in identity, right? That kind of weight, that heaviness is like, oh, this is how I have to be to push back against this.
Mm-hmm.
And just like anything, a denial of something is not enough. That's not enough to live. I can have a little plot of land. I say I want to grow something. So I'm just going to weed everything out. I'm going to spend all my time weeding and weeding and weeding and weeding and weeding and weeding. And you'll have a plot of land that's got nothing. And you will not be growing the thing that you need. And so it's, how do I clear away enough? And then how do I grow? How do I plant? How do I cultivate that? And not even just this one thing. Maybe if I grow something else, it supports it and I don't have to work so hard. And like, I can trust a process, just as we learn to trust our breath. Like we're breathing all the time. And we can take that as information. Oh, there might be something in me. I might be able to trust myself. I might be able to rely on something in me that's helping me to navigate this world. And that's important. And that's an important of this, of this cultivation of what our life is. This other piece, there's been, because of how we've been dehumanized as Black people, as people of African heritage, as people of color, as lots of other marginalized identities, because this is our society is very much based on that kind of hierarchy. Like power means power over, means you get to do what you want, means other people suffer because of it. And it's very hard for us to kind of unlearn that and then say, well, what do we actually need to cultivate to kind of find our personhood again?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes listening to like, oh, well, if I do that, if I want that to be relevant, I have to go and connect inside to those quiet places that I don't have practice doing, or maybe I don't want to, or it's uncomfortable. And it's how do we get to know ourselves again? And as a reactivity to the you're nothing, right, that white supremacy has done, as the institution of slavery has done, we sometimes then run to this other side where we are all powerful, right? We're all kings and queens. We're all powerful. And we forget that like we actually come from thousands and thousands and thousands of years of just being people, having ordinary things, living ordinary lives, but lives that are relevant to ourselves, our communities, to the unseen world, right? To our gods, to our goddesses, to our ancestors, to the earth itself. We forget that there's beauty in that ordinariness. Because if it's all about like having to be this larger than life thing, like we actually fall into what this culture has really done, where it's like the exceptional is who you pay attention to, is the expert who's going to tell you what to do and how to live and has the answers.
Yeah.
Instead of it's actually your own relationship with these things that needs to be cultivated and healed and valued and lived. Just grow. You're here. Let's explore that. And that's not the general message we get, right? There's certain ways of being successful. There's certain ways of being healthy.
Yes.
There's certain ways of being valued. And so these practices have really helped to shift that, to allow something else to grow and be there that I didn't even know was there.
Yes.
Right? Because you're going to grow something. You got all your intention in the world. And then like, oh, look, it's the thing I planted, but it's not what I thought it would be. Or like, wow, it's overabundance. Or wow, only a couple of little shriveled up things. So I got to do something else to cultivate it. It's in the, right? We do this, we cultivate this way of being, and then we live and see like, what is life? What is our relationship with life? And we move and accommodate and flow and respond versus just be reacting
all the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to be reacting. I just want to be flowing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be reacting. I don't want to get worked up, hyped up. I mean, I think there are times when you need to be, of course. But my everyday cannot be that all day, every
can't
day.
live that way.
I don't want to live that way.
Well, it's not. It's we're actually not designed as human beings to live that way.
Yeah.
And that's when you then see the kind of harmful effects of that relentlessness, of that drive, that push. Right? No one's resting. Right? So you have things that happen to us through our lives, and then all of a sudden there are these like very real illness that happens to us, physical, psychological, spiritual, all these things, and it's because of the ways that we're living. And so it can be really challenging to include ourselves in the liberation that we're really seeking for so many, right? There's a narrative about being the sacrifice. And in my tradition, as we talk about like peace, kind of change and chaos is like the norm of life. And if we want peace, we actually have to create the peace. And the way we do that is through sacrifice, whether it's, a kind of a ritual offering to our ancestors, to these divinities, or whether it's behavior, right? I'm going to sacrifice talking, filling up the space all the time and see what is cultivated instead. I'm going to take time, I'm going to sacrifice that to come down here today to be with you, right? There are all kinds of ways that sacrifice and offerings can be made to create the peace that we want.
And I think people find sacrifice distasteful.
Because we're not taught that that's what you do.
Although Lent is coming in the Christian faith, 40 days of marching toward Christ going to the cross, and people understand when they do Lent, they give up stuff. They sacrifice during Lent. You sacrifice, so you're already doing it. You just have to sort of take it out of Lent and make it a part of your everyday practical life.
Right. And so this as a practice is about that ongoingness of it. So it and this is the balance of, sacrifice isn't just about, doesn't just have to mean a suffering.
Right.
Right. There is suffering. Like that is also alive and well with us in our day to day. Right. But is what are we nourishing? Right. If you invite people over, right, you want to be close to someone. Oh, I like this, but I want to be close to them. You have to make an effort. You have to give up something. You have to sacrifice something to have that, to cultivate that.
Yes.
And that's real practical.
Yes.
Right? Time, resources.
Yes.
When you go out, I'm gonna have you over.
Yes.
Right? I'm gonna call you. Like I could be doing something else. Like
you sacrifice some freedom when you want to be in relationship to somebody. I had this conversation with somebody the other day.
But what's freedom then? Does
Free-
freedom just mean
your
freedom is
freedom
only if you're alone? You can't be free in relationship?
Oh no, I believe you.
I know. I was just saying that.
No, you're right. You're right. But and I think this is why relationships go awry, because people attach the wrong definitions to things. Like,
yeah. I want to be in a relationship only the way I want it all the time.
All the time.
And the way I'm living right now.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a piece about change. So for the way that what we've learned is that change and freedom don't go together.
Yeah.
Right. And this is in this whole process. I mean, it's not. I don't know if I'd say. I mean, so it's a part of this system and this kind of religion, this culture, because it's a different way of living, different way of being.
Mm-hmm.
But that notion of, like, what does it mean to be free, and what is change, aren't at all at odds with each other. Fundamentally, they're just not.
Mm-hmm.
And because life is change. And so if we're trying to, part of the challenge in this culture and part of this undoing and unlearning is like, oh, this notion of like, if I'm not in control, somehow things are out of control. And that is not true. I could feel that way, but that is not actually true.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the like sacrifice or surrender.
That's a tough one too. Surrender is huge.
Yes.
People are like, what?
Right.
I think people have a whole different definition of surrender. It gets people worked up.
Mm-hmm. People will surrender to the bliss and the good, like, I'm going to surrender. Like, it feels so good, right? But that is also a very specific cultural framework.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing innate about being a human being that makes it difficult to surrender,
mm-hmm.
right? We can have, as human beings, we are so diverse, and like our cultural structures and norms aim us places, aim us in directions on how it means. What does it mean that this culture is saying this is how you are to be a human being? And ours in this country, in this culture, doesn't. It says no, don't do that. There's things to do. Right?
And you should always be doing.
You should always be doing, except for, interesting, this notion of like independence and this notion of always doing and kind of following along and control. And I think it'd be very good for people to just think about, right? So those who have kind of explicit power are often kind of seen as the most like creative thinking or, kind of out there on the edge of things, yet they create systems to really control people and products,
mm-hmm.
right? And so there's this craziness really of our culture of no, find your way, listen to that voice, that's success. And then like, no, go to your job, do this the way we're telling you to do it, this is how you fit in, right? This is what school is. You sit here, you learn this way, this is what we think is important. And so those are totally at odds with each other, which is why you have very few people with lots and lots of institutional and societal power, if we talk about power a certain way,
mm-hmm.
and the vast majority don't, and don't have the tools and aren't also then being taught unless they start to think outside of these systems.
And the minute you do that, ooh.
Well, there's all kinds of systems to normalize. Normalize, assimilate. I got my,
do this
DSM,
with your hair.
Right. I got my like.
Everybody has to show up like this.
Yeah, this is what it means to be.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you want to fit in here? Here's the uniform.
Yes.
This is the language,
mm-hmm.
and then you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, they're very real. I mean, there's societal pieces and policies that are very real, cultural ones, interpersonal ones around like what's kind of normal behavior. But there are very real institutional power structures to keep you under control.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, we see it. I mean, my first job out of college was in the corporate world, and it was exhausting. I was like 22. It was, but I bought into it. I thought, I'm gonna climb this ladder. I'm gonna wear the suit. I'm gonna wear my Prada pumps. I'm gonna straighten my hair. And not to say that straightening hair is whatever. I'm just saying there's a look and a feel and a vibe that I bought into, mm-hmm. that I thought was acceptable to the status quo. And it took a long time to sort of like go my own way, you know. So
Well-
I'm happy to see young people sort of going their own way in their thinking, in their dress, in their attitude. I see it. I see some shifting in that. It certainly was a little different than when I was coming out of college in 85. So,
yeah. And, right, the kind of machine is going on, right?
yeah.
So, I mean, I'm always curious on where growth is happening, where people are finding kind of more room. And I think that overall there's certainly more space, kind of more of ourselves to be present.
Mm-hmm.
And I just hope that also continues to translate into institutional changes, structural changes, relational changes, so that we can really be as free as possible.
Yeah. I think what I'm
that's a
seeing,
movement.
Enroue, or what I want to see is, even if we cannot attack the institutional structures quickly or effectively, that we create for ourselves communities where we are in our communities and can be ourselves wholly and fully and beautifully. And I think we used to do that when we were segregated, and then segregation sort of moved us away from, that kind of collective community thing. And people still long for that, and I long for it too. But I think I long for it on a different level now. I like to be able to move in spaces that sort of support and celebrate the fact that I'm on this planet, rather than I always got to be in a mask everywhere I go, And so I'm starting to sort of feel like, no, the mask is going to stay right on the wall, and I'm going to show up how I show up. But I think that takes a lot of confidence and a willingness to put yourself and what you need before all these other things.
Well, it takes practice. And so even if we go back to this piece around this what ancestor reverence can offer us is that, it's being able to ask and get support, how do I do this differently? How do I deal with these very real struggles around work, around relationships, around hurt, around just not knowing, right, around the challenges of life? And our ancestors, were human beings who lived and had all these struggles, and they didn't look the same, right? We are in 2019 and didn't look the same in 1970, didn't look the same in 1980, didn't look the same in 1830, 1492. But there's support there, and there's ways that we can then right, kind of learn to listen and connect to that, to say, well, what do I need? Because that's part of the first question is all right, I don't even know how to ask that question of myself. I don't even know where I would find it. And so these practices are literal ways of kind of connecting with these forces and following those questions in really intimate, relevant spaces. The kind of honoring place that we make for our ancestors is about our people, right? So, setting it up is about here's the pictures of my people. This is the things that they maybe even had and held. I have some tools that my grandfather, my great grandfather used as carpenters, and that's on this space. There's pictures that I have there. There are things that remind me of them, even if they didn't have them. And these are things that help me to shift into a place of connecting with them, and the intimacy that's in there. The relevancy of that. It's not, here's the Ancestor 101 kit. You go and you put the thing here and it unfolds. It's not like your iPhone. Okay, I got and I do this and I can call and make all these things. It's, you are cultivating that kind of communication place, and a place where you feel at ease enough to touch upon the yearnings that you have to make this life relevant for you. And for some people, it's about making it relevant for you so you can be the best person, you can be the best parent, you can be the best partner, you can be the best policymaker, you can be the best carpenter, you can be the best whatever, to be, not, even as we talk, I talk about liberation, right? My practice is healing and liberation counseling. It's not that everyone, getting free and healing is going to push forth and do the same thing. That's it. That's part of the story that we're caught up in. We've
Because
lost
everybody's liberation is whatever their liberation is.
And we all are different people, have different needs, and right, hear things, see things, touch, taste things differently. And so it's creating that life that's in alignment with that, as opposed to, oh, okay, they've told me this is what success means, so I have to go fulfill that, right? So there's like larger purpose and meaning that we can come to and navigate the, like, when I walk out the door, this is what I have to deal with, right? But if we don't have that connection to purpose and meaning and something larger than like what this system is telling us, which is what happens, we are lost and confused, and we just serve it. And if we can connect with these other ways, we don't get lost. We can say, okay, I don't have to be reactive. I can say, oh, this is how I want to roll. And I still have to pay my taxes. I still got to show up here. I still got to fill out these forms. I still got to do this or whatever your work is. But I can do that as me,
right,
as closer to that as a person, as connected to what I need, as listening to that in a way that's relevant. And so then I could be present even as I make an appointment with somebody. I can be present sitting here in this conversation, right? It doesn't mean that I then have to kind of abandon my regular life to go do this other thing to be present. And then I got to come back, and then it's all jarring. It's what's the flow so that we can be more and more present in our lives.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I like that. So it's not jarring. So that we can, so that we can live these lives, but really essentially on our own terms. Liberation means so much to different people.
So when you say that, like on our own terms, there's a yes, and there's a story. There's some people, and it's so generalized in my mind. I don't know exactly who the people were in I think in Central and Southern Africa, and they had these children, these people, anthropologists, were studying people and all these things, and so they set up a race for these kids, and they said they had this huge bowl of fruit as the prize. And it's like, okay, so whoever crosses the line first wins and gets all the fruit, right? And like 12 to 20 kids, they're dashing, and as they got closer, they all reached out and grabbed each other's hands and crossed the finish line at the same time. So the notion of like on our own terms, the notion of like what is good for us is so skewed by this country and the values of this country, that it's not about connection. It's not about relationship. That your success is actually at the cost of someone else. That's what we learn, right? For you to be well, someone else has to be down.
That's a good point. Right? Ooh, that's a good point.
Yeah. And so unlearning that and saying like, there might be another way to be. Right? I live here, right? I'm assimilated into this country and this culture, and I'm navigating it. And if I hold and I can internalize some of these other ways of being, I'm not as confused and lost. And I can be connected to the things that help me and support me in not just kind of my success on my terms. Because if I've got distorted thinking, what I think is my success and on my terms is not actually going to lead to my health and my well-being and my liberation. So that's part of the kind of unlearning, the weeding. We got to do a little bit of weeding, and we got to do some growing. And maybe we got to grow something else. Yeah. Right? Or be open to that something else might be more nourishing for us than Popeyes. Right.
I'm going to take in my spirit today that one piece about success at succeeding up against somebody else's failure. Like for my success is dependent on somebody's failing.
Right.
And I have to change that mindset that we have to, I want to have a much more we all win kind of.
Yeah. At least inviting some of that in.
Yeah.
At least if that was an option. Like you talk about any like sports and games, like that's not the norm. Right? The norm isn't about playing and fun. It's about there's the winner.
Yes.
And we are all pushing ourselves to be that winner, and that we don't even know if there are other ways to push ourselves in a connection.
Yeah.
Cultures that are kind of a we culture, it's not that you're lost in it. It's that your purpose matters, as an integral part of a we.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not like, okay, the individual is kind of gone. It's no, but it's held differently, and it's seen as you're related to everything because that's how we experience reality.
And your individualness is celebrated as a part of the we,
Right.
and it's needed. We
It's
need
needed.
you to be you,
Right.
so that we could be we.
Right. I don't need you to be their notion of what you should be.
Mm-hmm.
Because then that's what we build.
Mm-hmm.
We continue to support and build these other notions of who we're
That's a
supposed
good
to be.
way to think. I like that. That should be taught early on. This notion of we, collective we, rather than I win, I have all the
win.
toys, I have everything. I want all the cheese.
Right.
And you get none.
Right.
And if you don't
then
get cheese, you have to go and figure out how to get cheese.
And you're looked down upon.
Yeah.
Right? You're actually punished for not knowing, for not getting it. I actually want to say, like, even in that comment around like growing kind of Popeyes, like when we're not taught the range of what we can have and what's a part of that's just a part of what we get just as being human beings, we can't be discerning, right? We're held up as like, oh, so here's, I can get, in terms of like looking at like food and like the food system, it's set up not for our health and well-being. And so there's a kind of a restoration that has to happen. And just like we make bad decisions are reactive, this is what we've just done to survive and what we've known. And so some of that is an increased awareness.
And the pushback on that Rules, when you walk into spaces and say, I no longer want to eat that. Mm-hmm. And people will give you this whole diatribe on, well, this is what got us through, and da-da-da-da. And
Popeyes didn't get us through.
Like people will go in on, who do you think you are kind of thing. And I was like, but look at our community. Look at the health of our community. That's all we have to do is look at our health. How we living and how we eating.
Right.
Seriously.
And there are ways that we can eat lots of things in healthy ways. Part of the challenge is even the things that we used to eat in healthy ways have become so commodified that they are not healthy for us anymore.
Yeah. And I hate the fact, I hate being a slave to what I eat. And I think I make pretty damn good choices overall. But I do think that we have a real problem. Mm-hmm. And we have a discerning problem around sugar and all those kinds of things, excess things, and I'm guilty of it too, just like anybody else. But the older I get, the more I realize, and the more I come to understand that dis-ease is really in my hands. Yeah, like a lot of things are when you sit and are quiet and still, and you're like, okay,
right. And even in that, you start to then learn like what's around the corner, right? And what I mean is that, things of this. I was a psychology major, and I've looked at, and like people are really interesting to me. And one thing that was really interesting, actually made me kind of leave the mental health field when I graduated from college, was how many people who like studied psychology and kind of human behavior go into advertising. Right. And so you get the creation of products that are designed to bypass your thinking, right? And to go into a sugar, fat, salt, like the body's like, yes, we want this, right? Just like, devices, if something moves, every like second or two, our eyes will attend to it. So things are created to keep us engaged in it, not because of our health, but because it makes somebody money.
Yeah.
And so getting to question some of that, and that's also part of the sacrifice. So, okay, how can I sacrifice the urge to do this thing? The urge doesn't necessarily mean it's good for me. The urge is an urge. How do I sacrifice that urge to get at what am I craving really?
Yes.
And am I craving this because I'm uncomfortable?
Yes.
Right? I can't sit by myself. So like the first thing that happens is the phone comes out or the device comes out so I can play the thing because I can't sit.
Yes.
How can we be curious about that so that we're not just that we're not connected to ourselves, but in the not connecting to ourselves, we are supporting something else. We're building and reinforcing something else that doesn't have our interests as a human being at heart.
That's a good point. I like that. I like thinking like this.
and these are all like, these are, one thing is like these traditions have helped me to kind of think outside the box, right? The box being the box store, right? How do I think outside of that? Right?
Yeah.
Into like, oh, here's land. This thing's growing. You know, we can memorize, I don't know, hundreds of logos. And it used to be that capacity used to be at memorizing sacred things, sacred knowledge, sacred literature, medicinal plants, song, ways of being, ways of building, ways of creating community, right? So the pathways are there.
Mm-hmm.
We have been kind of cultivated to use them for certain things, and that's that noise. And so how do we say, I'm going to pause on the noise
and get back
create
to
some
this.
space? Yeah.
Create some space where
I can be a person.
Yes, I can be a person. I can memorize a poem. I can learn how food can be medicine for me.
Yes.
You know, I can be with my friends and put my damn phone down and be present with them.
Right. I can cultivate this other way of being.
Yeah.
And it takes, it's not easy, but it's practice. It's a new practice.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, it's awkward, doesn't feel good. Just like you see a little baby trying to walk, it's awkward, and they're all over the place, and it doesn't look like they're, because they don't know what they're doing. And now, you know, in the kind of middle part of our lives, right, without, if there's nothing else impairing that, like we don't think about walking.
Right.
But there was a time where it was impossible.
And the time may come again.
And that time, right. That's what I'm saying. Like this, that's that arc there too.
Yeah,
right?
there's that. So thank you, Enroue. This
Thanks,
was
Babz.
good. Always.
Yes.
Thank y'all for listening, for everybody who's tuning in and sending me texts and enjoying the conversation. I appreciate it. So he'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yes. 2 weeks time.
We're going to keep this going because this is good stuff. So I will see y'all. I'll be back at the 10 o'clock hour. Go get yourself some coffee, and I'll be back. I'll play some music. Thank you, Harry. I'm going to play us out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Enroue.
Thank you, Babz.
It's always a pleasure.